The palace stands silent. The emperor has fallen. Ottoman banners now fly above the walls that for nearly 1,000 years had defied the greatest armies on earth. The city once called Constantinople has become the prize of another empire, and the civilization that claimed the legacy of Rome has finally come to an end. Yet this same empire had once commanded the crossroads of continents, amassed immense wealth, preserved the wisdom of the ancient world, and survived crisis after crisis when every rival expected it to disappear. How did one of history's most resilient civilizations finally reach this moment? To understand how it all ended, we must return to where it began. How does an empire survive for more than 1,000 years, while every rival around it rises, collapses, and disappears? How does a city endure wave after wave of invasion, plague, religious conflict, and political betrayal, yet remain the center of power for centuries? Most civilizations vanish long before reaching such an age, yet one refused to disappear. The story of the Byzantine Empire is not simply the continuation of Rome. It is the story of reinvention. Time and again, this civilization stood at the edge of extinction, only to pull itself back through determination, strategy, and an unshakable belief that it carried the destiny of an empire. Its armies guarded the gateway between Europe and Asia. Its merchants connected continents. Its scholars preserved knowledge that might otherwise have vanished forever. Yet despite shaping the medieval world for more than a millennium, it remains one of history's most misunderstood civilizations. This is the rise and fall of the Byzantine Empire, where one defining trait repeatedly determined its fate: resilience, the extraordinary ability to adapt when survival seemed impossible. By the 3rd century AD, the mighty Roman Empire had become too vast to govern effectively. Stretching from Britain to Egypt and from Spain to Mesopotamia, it covered nearly 5 million square kilometers and ruled perhaps 70 million people, but size had become its greatest weakness. Civil wars erupted as generals fought for the throne. Barbarian tribes pressed relentlessly against the frontiers. Inflation weakened the economy, while distant provinces grew increasingly difficult to control. Rome still looked invincible from the outside, but beneath the surface, its foundations were beginning to crack. In AD 284, Emperor Diocletian attempted a bold solution by dividing the empire into Eastern and Western administrations. The goal was greater efficiency, not the creation of two separate civilizations. Yet the eastern provinces already possessed advantages the West could not match. They were wealthier, more urbanized, and strategically positioned at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Trade from India, Arabia, and China flowed through their ports, filling imperial coffers with extraordinary wealth. Then came the decision that would alter history. In AD 330, Emperor Constantine the Great dedicated a new imperial capital on the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. Renamed Constantinople, it occupied one of the most defensible locations on Earth. Surrounded by water on 3 sides and commanding the narrow Bosporus Strait, it controlled the gateway between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Massive walls would soon transform it into a fortress unlike any the ancient world had ever seen. When the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed in AD 476, many believed Rome itself had died. It had not. In the East, emperors still ruled from Constantinople. Roman law remained in force. Latin gradually gave way to Greek. Christianity became ever more central to public life. Slowly, almost quietly, a new civilization emerged. It never called itself Byzantine. Its people believed they were Romans. Yet over the centuries, they would build something entirely new. An empire defined not by unchanging tradition, but by an extraordinary ability to adapt when every generation faced a new crisis. The empire's greatest strength was never simply its armies. It was its ability to evolve faster than its enemies. While neighboring kingdoms relied primarily on conquest, the Byzantines mastered diplomacy with astonishing sophistication. Gold often defeated opponents more effectively than swords. Foreign rulers received lavish gifts. Political marriages secured uneasy alliances. Rival tribes were encouraged to fight one another instead of Constantinople. Every treaty bought valuable time. Every negotiation strengthened the empire without spilling blood. At the center of this growing power stood Constantinople. Its population may have exceeded 500,000 during its early centuries, making it one of the largest cities on Earth. Ships crowded its harbors, carrying silk from China, spices from India, grain from Egypt, and precious metals from distant lands. Merchants speaking dozens of languages filled its markets. Wealth poured into the imperial treasury, funding armies, public works, and magnificent churches whose glittering mosaics reflected both prosperity and faith. Then one emperor dared to dream bigger than any who came before him. In AD 527, Justinian I ascended the throne with a vision few believed possible. He did not simply hope to defend the empire. He intended to restore the lost glory of Rome itself. His reign would become one of history's most extraordinary combinations of triumph and catastrophe. His brilliant general, Belisarius, launched astonishing campaigns across North Africa, defeating the Vandal kingdom with breathtaking speed before pushing into Italy against the Ostrogoths. Byzantine banners once again flew over territories that had been lost for generations. At its greatest territorial extent under Justinian, the empire stretched across much of the Mediterranean, reclaiming lands many believed were gone forever. Yet Justinian understood that conquest alone could never secure an empire. One of his most enduring achievements was the Corpus Juris Civilis, the comprehensive codification of Roman law. This legal masterpiece organized centuries of legislation into a coherent system that would later influence legal traditions across Europe and beyond. Long after emperors and armies had disappeared, many of its principles would continue shaping courts and governments around the world. It seemed that Justinian's dream was becoming reality. Then disaster struck. In AD 541, the plague of Justinian swept across the empire. Contemporary accounts describe thousands dying every day in Constantinople alone. Modern estimates suggest millions perished throughout the Mediterranean. At the very moment Justinian appeared closest to restoring Rome, disease threatened to erase everything he had built. For many civilizations, this would have marked the end. For Byzantium, it became another test. Even after plague, costly wars, and financial exhaustion, Constantinople endured. Its walls still stood. Its institutions adapted. Its rulers continued governing an empire that had once again survived what should have destroyed it. What emerged from those extraordinary decades was no longer merely the eastern half of Rome. It had become one of the medieval world's greatest powers, poised to enter an age of unmatched influence, wealth, and cultural brilliance. The Byzantine Empire reached its greatest heights not because it conquered more land than every rival, but because it became the indispensable bridge between worlds. Standing atop Constantinople's mighty Theodosian walls, an observer could watch ships arriving from every direction. Merchant vessels from Venice and Genoa unloaded European goods beside traders carrying silk from China, spices from India, incense from Arabia, and furs from the northern forests. Few cities in history occupied a more valuable position. Whoever controlled Constantinople controlled one of the world's greatest commercial crossroads, and the empire prospered from nearly every ship that passed through the Bosporus. The capital inspired awe. Visitors struggled to describe its scale and splendor. Marble avenues stretched between grand public squares. Palaces glittered with gold mosaics. Fountains flowed beside bustling markets where dozens of languages could be heard in a single afternoon. At its heart stood the Hagia Sophia, completed in AD 537. Its enormous dome seemed to float above the earth, flooding the vast interior with light reflected from thousands of golden tiles. Even centuries later, Travelers wrote that entering the cathedral felt less like stepping into a building than stepping into heaven itself. Yet Byzantine wealth supported far more than magnificent architecture. It sustained professional armies, an efficient bureaucracy, and one of the medieval world's most sophisticated intelligence networks. Imperial officials carefully tracked neighboring kingdoms, monitored political rivals, and gathered information through merchants, diplomats, and travelers. Long before modern intelligence agencies, Constantinople understood that knowledge could be as valuable as military strength. The empire also became Christianity's eastern stronghold. Missionaries carried Byzantine faith and culture deep into Eastern Europe, leaving an influence that still survives today. In the 9th century, Saints Cyril and Methodius developed the foundations of the alphabet that would eventually evolve into Cyrillic, allowing Christian texts to spread among Slavic peoples. From Bulgaria to Serbia and eventually Kievan Rus, Byzantine religion, literature, art, and law reshaped entire civilizations. The empire expanded not only through armies, but through ideas. Its military evolved with equal determination. Rather than relying solely on brute force, Byzantine commanders emphasized mobility, discipline, and deception. Manuals detailed battlefield tactics with remarkable precision, while heavily armored cavalry delivered devastating attacks at decisive moments. One of the empire's greatest military secrets, known simply as Greek fire, became legendary. This mysterious incendiary weapon could continue burning even upon water, terrifying enemy fleets that dared approach Constantinople's harbors. Its exact composition remains unknown to this day. Perhaps the empire's greatest achievement was not conquest, but preservation. While much of Western Europe endured centuries of political fragmentation following Rome's collapse, Byzantine scholars carefully copied ancient Greek and Roman manuscripts. The works of Homer, Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, and countless others survived because generations of Byzantine scribes refused to let them disappear. Centuries later, many of these texts would help fuel the Italian Renaissance, influencing science, philosophy, mathematics, and art across Europe. To many observers, Constantinople seemed eternal. Its towering walls had repelled Persians, Avars, Arabs, Bulgars, and countless other invaders. Empires rose and vanished beyond its horizons while the city endured, growing richer with every generation. Resilience had become more than a strategy. It had become an identity. Yet history often hides its greatest dangers behind its greatest successes. Even as Byzantine civilization reached extraordinary heights, subtle fractures were already beginning to spread beneath the polished marble. The first cracks did not appear on the city's walls. They appeared within the empire itself. Success had brought confidence. Over time, confidence hardened into complacency. Powerful aristocratic families accumulated enormous estates, while small landowners, long the backbone of military recruitment, struggled to survive. Wealth became concentrated in fewer hands, weakening the social foundation that had sustained Byzantine resilience for centuries. The warning signs were easy to overlook. Religious unity also began to fracture. Fierce theological disputes consumed emperors, bishops, and ordinary citizens alike. Debates over doctrine increasingly became political battles, dividing communities that had once stood together against external enemies. Then, in 1054, centuries of growing disagreement culminated in the Great Schism. Christianity formally split into the Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Eastern Orthodox Church in the East. The consequences reached far beyond theology. The split poisoned relations between Constantinople and Western Europe at precisely the moment cooperation would become increasingly vital. Beyond the empire's borders, new powers were rising with remarkable speed. Among them were the Seljuk Turks, whose victories transformed the balance of power across the Near East. In 1071, Byzantine forces met the Seljuks at the Battle of Manzikert in eastern Anatolia. The consequences would echo for centuries. Emperor Romanos IV was captured. military cohesion collapsed. Much of Anatolia, the empire's primary recruiting ground, agricultural heartland and economic engine, was gradually lost. The defeat was devastating. What followed proved even worse. Rival claimants fought for the throne, while precious resources were consumed in civil wars, instead of defending shrinking frontiers. Every internal conflict handed the empire's enemies another opportunity to advance. Desperate for help, Emperor Alexios I Komnenos appealed to Western Europe for military assistance. His request helped inspire the First Crusade. Initially, cooperation brought important victories, and lost territories were recovered. For a brief moment, it appeared the empire might recover once again, but the alliance rested on mutual suspicion rather than trust. Byzantine emperors viewed many crusaders as unpredictable opportunists, while Western nobles increasingly looked upon Constantinople with envy. The richest city in Christendom had become both an ally and an irresistible prize. The empire still possessed immense wealth, formidable defenses, and a remarkable ability to recover. To many contemporaries, it remained fully capable of surviving yet another crisis, just as it had so many times before. But history had begun to change direction. The dangers gathering beyond the horizon were no longer distant threats. They were coming for Constantinople itself, and resilience was about to face its greatest test. The empire had survived Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, plagues, and centuries of political turmoil. What finally brought it to its knees was not one enemy or one disastrous battle, but the slow erosion of the resilience that had made it seem nearly indestructible. The greatest blow came not from the Muslim world. It came from fellow Christians. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade arrived outside the walls of Constantinople. Originally intended to reclaim Jerusalem, the Crusaders became entangled in Byzantine politics and Venetian commercial ambitions. Instead of marching east, they turned their weapons against the richest city in Christendom. What followed stunned even people accustomed to the brutality of medieval warfare. For 3 days, Constantinople was systematically looted. Priceless manuscripts disappeared forever. Churches were stripped of gold and sacred relics. Ancient statues that had survived since classical Greece and Rome were melted down for coin. Homes burned. Civilians were massacred. Treasures accumulated over nearly 9 centuries vanished in a matter of days. The city that had resisted countless foreign armies had been broken by those who claimed to be its allies. The Latin Empire was established while Byzantine rulers fled to successor states such as Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond. Although the Empire of Nicaea recaptured Constantinople in 1261 under Michael VIII Palaiologos, the victory concealed a painful truth. The empire had regained its capital. It had not regained its strength. Trade increasingly fell under the control of the powerful Italian maritime republics, especially Venice and Genoa, draining wealth that had once filled imperial coffers. Provinces continued slipping away. Tax revenues declined. The once feared professional army shrank until emperors relied heavily on foreign mercenaries, whose loyalty often lasted only as long as payment continued. Meanwhile, a new power was rising across Anatolia. The Ottoman Turks expanded steadily throughout the 14th century, absorbing former Byzantine territory piece by piece. Unlike earlier invaders, they possessed both military momentum and political unity. As Byzantine lands contracted, Constantinople gradually became an isolated island, surrounded by Ottoman territory. By the early 15th century, the empire consisted of little more than the capital itself, a handful of scattered possessions and fading memories of imperial greatness. Yet even in its final years, Byzantine resilience refused to disappear. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos understood the odds. When Sultan Mehmed II assembled perhaps 80,000 soldiers, supported by massive cannons, capable of battering even the legendary Theodosian walls, the defenders numbered only around 7,000 men, including Byzantine soldiers, foreign volunteers, and the experienced Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani. For 53 days, they refused to surrender. The ancient walls that had protected Constantinople for nearly 1,000 years trembled beneath relentless bombardment. Cannons, unlike anything previously seen in siege warfare, blasted openings that defenders desperately repaired each night. Ottoman ships were hauled over land to bypass the city's defensive chain across the Golden Horn, demonstrating extraordinary ingenuity. One by one, every advantage that had once protected Constantinople was overcome. Then came the final assault. Before dawn on May 29, 1453, wave after wave of Ottoman troops surged toward the battered walls. Giustiniani was gravely wounded and carried from the battlefield, dealing a crushing blow to the defenders' morale. Emperor Constantine XI reportedly removed his imperial insignia and charged into the fighting beside his soldiers, choosing to die defending his city rather than flee. His body was never conclusively identified. As Ottoman banners rose above the walls, an empire that had endured for more than 1,100 years came to an end. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across Europe. Refugee scholars carried precious Greek manuscripts westward, helping fuel the Renaissance. European kingdoms accelerated their search for new trade routes to Asia, a quest that would eventually lead to the Great Age of Exploration. The Byzantine Empire was gone. Its influence was only beginning. Empires often leave behind monuments. The Byzantine Empire left behind civilizations. Its influence lives on in the Eastern Orthodox Church, whose traditions, liturgy, and architecture continue to shape the spiritual lives of hundreds of millions across Greece, the Balkans, Eastern Europe, and beyond. The shimmering domes and brilliant mosaics that once defined Constantinople still inspire churches around the world. Its legal legacy survived through Justinian's codification of Roman law, which became one of the foundations of many modern legal systems. Its scholars preserved countless works of classical philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and literature that might otherwise have disappeared during the upheavals of the medieval world. Without generations of Byzantine scribes, much of the intellectual inheritance of ancient Greece and Rome may never have reached the Renaissance or the modern age. The empire also demonstrated that power is not measured solely by conquest. For centuries, diplomacy proved as valuable as armies. Commerce created influence equal to military victory. Knowledge became a weapon as powerful as steel. Again and again, resilience allowed Byzantium to adapt when other empires would have vanished. Yet its story also offers a timeless warning. No walls are high enough when unity crumbles from within. No treasury is large enough when institutions weaken. No civilization, regardless of its brilliance, can assume yesterday's successes will guarantee tomorrow's survival. Today, Istanbul stands where Constantinople once ruled the crossroads of continents. Millions cross the Bosporus each year, often unaware they are passing through one of history's greatest stages, where the fate of empires was decided for more than a millennium. The Byzantine Empire reminds us that greatness is never permanent. Resilience must constantly be renewed. History's strongest civilizations are remembered not only for how they rose, but for how they endured against impossible odds. And in the end, even the mightiest walls could not hold back time.